My name is Dr. Kenneth Christie. I'm the program head and a professor in the Human Security and Peacebuilding graduate programs at Royal Roads University. And I am also the president of the Confederation of University Faculty Associations of British Columbia, or CUFA BC. CUFA BC is the provincial voice for more than 5,500 university professors, instructors, lecturers, and academic librarians at the 5 research universities across the province. We work with the faculty associations at Royal Roads University, Simon Fraser University, the University of British Columbia, the University of Northern British Columbia, and the University of Victoria. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which CUFA BC's office resides is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. We acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Stolo nations of this province. We recognize the inherent Indigenous rights and title, the implementation without qualification of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and our support for the 94 calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we are here today to represent or to present the winners of the 2023 CUFA BC Distinguished Academics Awards. Each year since 1995, CUFA BC honours the outstanding scholarship and public policy contributions of distinguished academics in BC, academics whose research and scholarly activity have made significant contributions to the community beyond the academy. We believe that the ideas that flow from universities contribute in significant ways to the public good, to our citizenry, and to a democratic landscape, our intellectual life, and our economy. The awards demonstrate the necessity and vitality of public universities' research and scholarly activity. I'm now pleased to present the winner of the 2023 CUFA BC Early in Career Award to Dr. Katya Rhodes. This award recognizes significant contributions to the broader community made by faculty members who are at an early point in their careers. It represents the admiration of colleagues from across institutions, from across disciplines, geographic borders, and beyond. Dr. Rhodes joins us to talk about her research.
My name is Dr. Katya Rhodes. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Public Administration at the University of Victoria.
So I guess, Dr. Rhodes, the first question is, can you tell me a little bit about your research interests?
I study climate policy design to help countries and their regions reduce emissions and meet climate targets. And specifically, I studied 2 aspects of climate policy. First, what makes policies effective in reducing emissions? For that, I use energy economy models to understand the impacts of policies on emissions, economy, jobs. And second, what makes policies politically acceptable and therefore long-lasting? For that, I typically use large-scale surveys and interviews with stakeholders to understand how and why people support or oppose different policy designs.
I was looking at your work, and it says you're recognized for your work in developing critical solutions to mitigate disastrous climate change impacts in the province and worldwide. Can you tell me a little bit about your work with the Institute for Integrated Energy Systems, the IES, Vic?
Absolutely. At the Institute for Integrated Energy Systems, we bring together pioneering research from multiple disciplines to resolve the energy climate crisis. We work together with engineers, economists, political scientists, psychologists, in order to come up with effective solutions. And because ISVIC stands out in its ability to do so, I managed to produce effective research and engaged in teaching. So specifically, I work with engineers to develop energy economy models that help us project impacts of climate policies on emissions, recognizing the limitations of our energy systems. As part of my SHRC synthesis grant, I reviewed models that are used in Canada for answering a lot of different climate policy questions. Right now, with my PhD student, we study political costs of climate policy using energy economy models and surveys. I also work with economists to understand how policies can reduce emissions at low to moderate cost to society using different market flexibility features of policies. I also work with psychologists. As part of my Shirk Insight Development Grant, we've recently looked into why and how people support or oppose low carbon heating technologies like heat pumps. And for that, we look into psychological theories, work with sociologists to understand impacts of societal thinking, norms on that kind of behavior. And finally, I work with governments and political scientists to understand how we can continue growing our economies while reducing emissions, and what we can learn from other jurisdictions in the world in terms of climate policy successes and apply those lessons here in British Columbia and Canada.
I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your involvement now as an advisory council member for the BC Centre for Innovation in Clean Energy.
I joined the centre about a year ago in an advisor role. The center is an independent body that funds innovators in industry to help them accelerate technology commercialization. And the reason why I joined the center is because industry represents 40% of our emissions, and it is now the most politically challenging sector to reduce emissions in. So I believe in collaborations. I strongly think it's not us against them. We need to work together in order to come up with technology solutions. And specifically, I'm interested in the link between policy and technology implementation. So for example, in British Columbia, we have a low carbon fuel standard, and in Canada, we have a clean fuel standard that requires reducing average carbon intensities in transportation fuels, meaning that we need to have more biofuels in our transportation fuel mix. And for that, we need to have biofuel markets. And that's what I'm interested in. At the center, we are trying to fund innovators who are bringing in these markets locally to British Columbia and to Canada. And I think that's really important to work together, share knowledge, and innovate together.
Your nomination letter describes you as having a core value of training, mentoring, and empowering people to make a difference in their communities, which is so important. Why is it important to you to engage in research that's in the public's interest?
I think to solve any societal issue, let alone climate change, we need to work together and empower each other. We produce and consume things in a way that affects many different people, species, and the planet's health. In a similar way, we need to be able to work together, innovate together to reduce our impact on the planet and other people. And I'm privileged to do so by sharing knowledge with students and peers at the University of Victoria. When I teach students, I make sure that they gain practical knowledge from my lectures. I bring in insights from different disciplines. I have guest speakers coming from different sectors of the economy. I worked in the BC government before designing provincial climate policy, so I bring in a lot of climate policymakers. I bring in industry representatives, climate policy advocate representatives. And students really love that. Now more than ever, students want to gain practical knowledge, given that they can access YouTube and other social media outlets that will give them a lot of information. We need to make sure that we meet the needs of students by empowering them, giving them access to practical knowledge. And when I mentor students, I make sure they're connected to key experts in the fields of their interest. I give them guidance, I connect them with experts, and give them a lot of public speaking opportunities to make sure that their name gets noticed, that they build confidence in continuing on my path and promoting effective climate policy solutions. And finally, I strongly believe that students and my peers empower me in conducting research in the public interest. students are our future. I really care about them. And so I learn a lot from what young generation has to offer. Now more than ever, students are eager to resolve the issue of climate change, and they're very desperate. So I feel very, very privileged to work with my students.
I was wondering, Dr. Rhodes, if you could tell me a little bit how your research has enabled access to higher education in British Columbia.
Well, first, when students approach me with the interest to conduct research under my supervision, I make sure that I have funding to allow students to come and work with me on similar research interests without any financial constraints. In most of my grant applications, 80% of the budget is dedicated towards salaries and stipends. And when that's not possible, I make sure I help students to receive scholarships and awards to make their life easier. And as a result of the funding model, students have more time and ability to write joint publications. All of my publications are written with students. It gives them the opportunity to put their name out there, to get recognized. So that's one way. I also sit on a lot of different admission committees in our school and at the university when we select or nominate people for different awards. And that also allows to select students based on their not just career paths and GPA, but also based on their lived experiences, multicultural backgrounds, what they bring to the table, whether they represent different sectors of the economy when they come and study at the University of Victoria. When I mentor students, I think that my approach to supervision, which is by coaching students through the process rather than being a top-down supervisor, that really encourages students to come to me and work with me. I try to identify people's strengths rather than focusing on their weaknesses, and I aim to put them in groups so that they learn from each other and have complementary skills. And then students can also travel together to conferences and present together. So I think that approach to understanding people and leading them to developing their skills and amplifying their strengths is really empowering and important in terms of giving access to post-secondary education. And I think finally, being a female expert in the field of climate energy solutions is really empowering and important for young girls who want to pursue their career in this field. I've graduated a couple of students by now who are young females, and they chose to be in the field that is quite new to female researchers. And I think that in a way is also empowering.
That's great. And sort of following on from that, how would you say that your work supports the themes that are important in universities today, like equity, diversity, inclusion? How does your work support that?
So I'm an immigrant from Russia. I came to Canada 13 years ago. So I know what it's like to live in challenging situations, to be brought up in a financially constrained environment. So I think the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion come naturally to me. At the University of Victoria, I employ these principles organically at every single step of my research. When I recruit students or when I form teams to conduct grants, write grants, conduct research, I make sure that all teams are balanced, be it academics or students or staff or consultants. I make sure that that balance is not just in terms of gender and culture, that people have different lived experiences, that we have Indigenous voices at the table. So I also belong to a group called Women in Sustainable Energy Research. That's a great outlet to post ads, to let people know in marginalized populations or communities about opportunities in my lab. When we do research, I tend to do a lot of representative surveys of population. By making surveys representative, we make sure that we represent the whole population, not just a particular portion of population. But when we work with existing data sources, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are cultural and institutional gaps and to employ methods like interviews with marginalized communities that allow us for this extra input that's lacking. And finally, when I disseminate my research findings, I work with communications experts in the university to make sure that information is shared via different outlets. I also translate every single piece of research into lay terms and publish it in op-eds in newspapers, media interviews, or I go to specific outlets that are interesting to marginalized communities where access to internet, for example, is limited.
How does your work support or try to support the advance to calls to action in the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission report?
My role as an educator at the University of Victoria is to enhance opportunities for Indigenous students. So for that, like I said earlier, I sit on admission committees, and we make sure that when we have Indigenous applications from Indigenous students, that those are considered as applications of great interest, or that students that apply to our school are interested in researching aspects of Indigenous community energy management or ways of applying traditional ecological knowledge to our energy climate crisis issues. When I teach at the university, I make sure that I have units in my classes that have to deal with Indigenous ways of knowing. In my economics course, I have a unit on Indigenous economics where we talk about challenges and opportunities of running a business in Canada as an Indigenous business owner. I also learn myself every day as a settler in Canada about Indigenous histories. So I require students to have very short presentations in the beginning of each lecture in person to present on an interesting fact about Lekwungen-speaking peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands. There are multiple ways we can address the issue of truth and reconciliation. As part of the recent conference for the Canadian Society for Ecological Economics, our theme was pathways for sustainable and inclusive recoveries. And Indigenous communities are the first place to look for answers. So we had lots of keynote speakers, panelists, sessions at the conference where we talked about applying traditional ecological knowledge, transitioning societies from the pandemic times into a more sustainable and healthy path for the planet. So I tend to work with Indigenous communities and also learn every day myself about ways that we can build sustainable societies. Mm-hmm.
One of my final questions has to do with what sort of led you, do you think, to become successful in your field of work? And what lessons could you share with new academics, people that are early in career, for instance, seeking to become experts in their fields as you have?
Thank you, Ken. I think it's an important question, as many people struggle to understand what they want to do, how they want to build career, especially in academia. It may seem challenging after many years of spending time doing research as a PhD or postdoctoral researcher. I think for me, I think I mentioned earlier, working with people rather than against people is really important. There are so many passionate, climate-sincere experts out there, especially in academia. We meet the people who argue the most about ultimate solutions, yet they have the same values. So for me, it's important to know that different people have different opinions, but the values are the same. So try to find ways in which you can reconcile your differences and develop effective solutions. I personally think it's really important to have a mentor, a person who you admire, whose values you share. Like indigenous communities, for example, they always tell us, listen to elders. Like find an older person who has more knowledge in the field of your interest, and listen to their advice once in a while, ask questions, be curious. Then when you work on something, work with really trustworthy colleagues. Find 2 or 3 people who you really enjoy working with. They may even become your best friends. And finally, approach any question with curiosity and have fun. I think it's important to take risks, to fall before you rise. Try to find research questions or fields of work that are super interesting. Be curious, ask questions, and just enjoy the journey.
Wow, thank you. And lastly, I'm wondering if there's anything you wish to say to the nominators of the BC Distinguished Awards Committee.
I'm very grateful for being considered for this award and for being selected as a successful award recipient. Thank you very much. I think it's important, especially when we work hard, to recognize achievements. And I really want to encourage everyone to celebrate the small and big achievements publicly or privately at home. Just fill your world with positivity. There are so many negative things out there. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to sit back, relax, and enjoy the process of being a recipient of this award.
Thank you for joining me today to talk about your work. I want to congratulate you again on the award for the 2023 CUFA Early in Career Award as part of our Distinguished Academics Award series. And I look forward to following your successes at the University of Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you.